The snow muffled every sound as the tires crunched to a stop at the edge of the forest. Cold air rushed in when the door opened, biting Claire's face as her husband lifted her wheelchair from the trunk with practiced ease. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with white, watching. "Where are we?" Claire asked, her voice thin but steady. He didn't look at her as he tightened his gloves. "Just somewhere quiet," he said. "You've had enough noise in your life." Then the click of metal, a sharp snap. Her wheel jerked sideways. From deeper in the forest, unseen footprints pressed into fresh snow, and what her husband didn't know was that someone had already found their trail. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit subscribe so you never miss another tale of loyalty, courage, and heart. Your support truly means the world. Winter pressed down on the small American town with quiet authority, snow whitening rooftops and pine branches alike, while a hard wind carried the scent of ice, wood smoke, and something long unfinished. Ethan Walker stepped out of his truck and stood still for a moment, letting the cold bite into his lungs. At 36, he carried himself with the controlled stillness of a man trained not to waste movement. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture straight without stiffness, as if his spine remembered discipline even when his mind tried to rest. A short, well-kept beard lined a sharp jaw, and his dark hair was cropped close, practical, unremarkable by design. His eyes, a muted gray, scanned the property the way they had scanned villages and ridgelines overseas, not searching for danger, but unable to stop assessing it. Beside him, Rook leapt down from the truck bed. The German shepherd was 7 years old, black and tan, with a scarless muzzle and alert amber eyes that missed very little. His movements were smooth, economical, the confidence of a working dog who knew his purpose. Rook paused, nose low to the snow, tail steady, not wagging, not tense. Watching, waiting. He had learned, as Ethan had, that silence was often the safest language. The house hadn't changed. Weathered wood, a sagging porch rail, a roof that had been repaired too many times by hands that knew forests better than nails. This was the home Ethan had grown up in, built by his father, Thomas Walker, a forest ranger whose life had ended exactly where it had begun, among trees and storms. Thomas had died years ago during a winter search and rescue, leading a lost hiker out of a blizzard and never making it back himself. That loss had carved something permanent into Ethan, a quiet gravity that followed him everywhere. It was one of the reasons he'd chosen the Navy SEALs. Not glory, not heroism, structure, purpose, and the unspoken belief that if danger had to exist, someone should be trained to walk toward it. He pushed open the door. The warmth inside was uneven, coming from a wood stove that struggled against the cold. Sitting near it was Margaret Walker, his mother. She was 68, thin in a way that spoke of long winters and careful budgeting rather than vanity. Her hair, once dark, was now mostly silver and pulled back into a low knot that exposed a narrow neck. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over fine bones. When she breathed, there was a faint wheeze, a reminder of the lung disease that had settled into her chest years earlier, worsened by age and grief. "Ethan," she said, pushing herself up with effort, forcing a smile that reached her eyes but not her lungs. He crossed the room in 3 strides and gently pressed her back into the chair. His hands were large, steady, careful in a way that contrasted sharply with the violence they had once been trained to deliver. "Sit," he said softly. "You don't win points for pretending you're fine." She smiled at that. Margaret had always been sharp, practical, a woman shaped by poverty and endurance. After her husband's death, she'd learned to survive on small pensions, church help, and pride carefully folded away when it no longer served her. "You're thinner," she observed, her gaze sweeping him with maternal accuracy. "You're still bossy," he replied. Rook padded forward and rested his head against her knee. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she stroked the thick fur. Animals had always calmed her. Unlike people, they didn't look at illness with fear or pity. They simply adjusted. That night, after dinner, simple, quiet, heavy with things not said, Ethan stepped back outside with Rook. The forest began just beyond the old fence line, dense and familiar. He ran there every evening now, boots striking frozen earth, breath fogging the air, muscles burning in a way that reminded him he was still useful. The forest was more than exercise. It was memory. It was discipline. It was how he kept the war from following him into sleep. As they moved between the trees, Ethan felt the familiar loosening inside his chest. Rook ran slightly ahead, circling back now and then, checking in without instruction. They trusted each other completely. That kind of trust was rare. It had to be earned under pressure, tested when mistakes cost lives. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Ethan slowed, scanning the tree line out of habit. Nothing was wrong. Not yet. But the forest had a way of holding secrets, of waiting for the right moment to release them. He didn't know it then, but this familiar path, this ordinary winter evening, was about to bend toward something he thought he had left behind long ago. Not a mission, not a battlefield, but a reckoning. And the forest, patient as ever, was already preparing its next test. Snow fell in a steady hush as the SUV slowed at the edge of the forest road, headlights carving pale tunnels through the trees. The engine idled once, then cut. Silence rushed in, thick and absolute, broken only by wind threading through bare branches. Michael Harrington stepped out first. He was 38, tall and immaculately dressed even for a winter drive, his wool coat pressed, his leather gloves spotless. His hair was neatly combed, dark with a hint of silver at the temples, the kind of detail that suggested careful maintenance rather than age. His face was smooth and symmetrical, handsome in a way that felt curated, his smile practiced for boardrooms and charity galas. In public, Michael carried himself like a man accustomed to trust. In private, that polish hardened into something colder, precise, efficient, and detached. He opened the trunk and lifted out the wheelchair with a familiarity that came from months of repetition. The metal frame clinked softly as it met the snow. Claire Harrington watched from the passenger seat, her breath fogging the window. At 34, she had a delicate build, narrow shoulders wrapped in a heavy coat that swallowed her frame. Her dark blonde hair fell to her shoulders in loose waves, slightly disheveled from the drive. Her skin, pale against the winter light, showed the faint bluish tone of cold creeping in already. Her eyes, wide, expressive, and a little too alert, tracked every movement Michael made. "Where are we?" she asked, keeping her voice level. Years of living carefully had taught her how to hide unease behind politeness. Michael didn't answer immediately. He moved with quiet purpose, unfolding the wheelchair, checking the locks as if performing a routine task. The forest around them felt vast and indifferent. The road they had taken already softened by falling snow. "Just a place to get some air," he said at last, his tone mild. "You've been cooped up." Claire hesitated, then nodded. She trusted him because she had been trained to. By her father, by doctors, by a lifetime of being told that other people knew what was best for her. Michael helped her out of the car. His hands were firm, impersonal, efficient. He set her into the chair and brushed snow from the armrest with a care that might have looked tender from a distance. Up close, it felt transactional. The cold bit immediately. Claire pulled her scarf higher, the wind pressing it back against her throat. "There's no signal out here," she said, glancing at her phone. The screen showed nothing but a mocking blank. Michael's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That's kind of the point." He crouched beside the wheelchair. For a moment, Claire thought he might kiss her cheek, the way he used to when cameras were present. Instead, she heard the sharp metallic click beneath her seat. Then another. The chair shifted, just slightly, but enough to make her heart stutter. "Michael?" Her voice cracked, despite her effort. He reached under the frame and twisted hard. Something snapped. The left wheel sagged inward at an unnatural angle. Claire stared down, confusion rushing into fear. "What are you doing?" Michael stood, brushing snow from his knees. Up close, his expression had changed. The pleasant mask was gone, replaced by something stripped bare and calculating. His eyes, a cool brown, held no warmth now, only relief. "I'm done pretending," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, as if delivering bad news in a conference room. "I never loved you, Claire. I loved what you came with." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You were convenient," he continued. "Your father made sure of that, and after he died you became very convenient." The words landed with brutal clarity. Images flashed through her mind. Documents she hadn't read, meetings she hadn't attended, signatures she'd trusted him to handle. "You're sick," she whispered. Michael sighed, a sound of mild annoyance. "I'm practical." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "By morning, the storm will cover everything. The chair, the tracks. It will look like you wanted to be alone. People will understand. They always do." Claire's hands trembled. She reached for him instinctively, fingers brushing his sleeve. "Please," she said, "I trusted you." He stepped back immediately, as if contact repulsed him. "You trusted the idea of me," he corrected. "That's not the same thing." He turned away, walked back to the driver's door, then paused. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or simply the discomfort of unfinished business. "Try not to scream," he added over his shoulder. "No one's close enough to hear." The engine roared to life. Snow kicked up as the SUV reversed, then swung around. Red taillights burned through the white curtain for a moment before disappearing down the road. Claire was alone. The forest closed in, the sound of the car swallowed by wind and falling snow. She tested the wheel again, panic surging as it refused to turn. The cold seeped deeper into her legs, her hands, her chest. Her breath came in shallow bursts, fogging the air like fragile glass. She fumbled for her phone again. Still no signal. "I'm here," she whispered to no one, the words breaking apart as tears froze on her lashes. Above her, the trees stood unmoving, ancient and silent, as if they had seen this before. And somewhere beyond the road, Michael Harrington drove on, already rehearsing his grief, unaware that the forest had not finished telling its story. The forest behind the Walker property was quiet in the way only winter could manage. Sound swallowed by snow, movement slowed, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Ethan ran at an even pace, boots crunching rhythmically against the frozen ground. His shoulders rolled smoothly with each stride, muscles working from habit more than effort. Beside him, Rook moved like a shadow given form. Rook was 7 years old, a full-grown German shepherd with a powerful chest and lean flanks built for endurance. His coat was thick, black along the spine and tan at the legs and muzzle, dusted now with flecks of snow. His ears stayed upright, constantly adjusting, his amber eyes alert but calm. He ran slightly ahead of Ethan, then drifted back, a pattern they had repeated hundreds of times. It wasn't obedience, it was partnership. Ethan's mind was quieter here. The forest absorbed the sharp edges of memory, the sudden noises, the flashes of violence that sometimes followed him home from deployments. Running was how he reminded his body that it was still in control, that the war did not get to decide who he was when the sun went down. Rook stopped. Not abruptly, not panicked. He slowed, nose lowering toward the ground, tail stiffening in a straight line. Ethan slowed with him, breath steady, senses sharpening instantly. Years of training had wired him to trust changes in pattern more than any sound. He followed Rook's gaze and saw it, a shallow groove in the snow crossing the trail at an odd angle. Tracks. They were fresh. The snow around them hadn't settled yet, the edges still crisp, not boot prints, wheel marks. Ethan crouched, gloved fingers hovering just above the surface. The indentation was uneven, slightly warped on one side, as if the wheel hadn't been aligned properly. He straightened slowly, scanning the trees. This wasn't a hiking trail. It wasn't a tourist route. and no one local brought equipment out here in the middle of a snowstorm. Rook let out a low bark, short and sharp, then moved forward, nose sweeping side to side. His pace quickened. "Easy," Ethan murmured, though his own pulse had begun to climb. They followed the trail deeper into the trees. The wind picked up, snow swirling low along the forest floor. Ethan's breath fogged the air as the silence pressed closer, thicker now, almost expectant. Then he heard it, a sound so small it almost blended with the wind, a sob. Ethan broke into a run. Rook surged ahead, barking now, urgent and insistent. They cleared a cluster of pines and Ethan saw her. Claire sat just off the trail, her wheelchair tilted awkwardly in the snow. One wheel sagged inward at a broken angle, half buried. Her hands were bare, red and trembling, clutching the armrests as if they were the only things anchoring her to the world. Her coat hung open slightly, her scarf loose around her neck. Snow clung to her hair and lashes, melting into tear tracks on her cheeks. She looked smaller than he's, remembered. Thinner, paler. Her shoulders were hunched forward, posture collapsed inward, not from weakness alone, but from shock. Her breathing was shallow and fast, each inhale catching as if it hurt. She rocked slightly, a reflexive motion of fear and cold. "Claire," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the air before he realized he'd spoken. She flinched, head snapping up. Her eyes were wide, unfocused at first, then locking onto him with sudden, disbelieving intensity. "Ethan?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than breath. "No, I'm hallucinating." He was beside her in seconds, dropping to one knee. Up close he could see the early signs of hypothermia, the bluish tint creeping into her lips, the tremor in her hands that wouldn't stop. Her skin was ice cold through the thin fabric of her gloves. "No," he said firmly, "you're not." Rook circled her wheelchair, then pressed his body against her side, thick fur radiating warmth. He stayed there, steady and silent, as if he understood exactly what she needed. Ethan pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, careful not to jostle her. His movements were precise, practiced, the same ones he'd used on injured teammates in places far colder and far more hostile than this. "What happened?" he asked, keeping his tone even. Her lips trembled. He left me." That was all she managed before her composure cracked. Tears spilled freely now, her breath hitching as the words tumbled out in fragments. Forest, car, broken wheel, no signal. Ethan's jaw tightened. Anger flared sharp and immediate, but he forced it down. Rage could wait. Survival could not. He checked her pulse, then her hands, rubbing warmth back into them. "Claire, I need you to listen to me," he said. "You're going to be okay, but we need to move." She shook her head weakly. "The chair!" "I know." His eyes flicked to the damaged wheel. "I'll carry you." Her gaze snapped back to his, panic flashing. "You can't. I'm too heavy. You'll—" "I've carried men twice your size," he said quietly. "You're not a burden." The word seemed to hit her harder than the cold. He crouched behind the wheelchair, bracing himself, then lifted her carefully, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. She was light in his arms, frighteningly so, her body tense with fear. She clutched his jacket, fingers digging in as if afraid he might disappear. Rook stayed close as Ethan turned back toward the trail, moving fast but controlled, every step deliberate. As they disappeared into the trees, the snow began to fall harder, softening the tracks they left behind. By morning, the forest would look untouched. But for now, Ethan Walker was carrying a ghost from his past through the dark, unaware that this rescue was only the beginning of a much larger fight. The cabin lights cut through the snow like a quiet promise. Ethan pushed through the front door with Claire still in his arms, his boots leaving wet prints across the old wooden floor. Heat rushed toward them from the iron stove in the corner, sharp and almost painful against skin numbed by cold. Rook followed close behind, snow clinging to his fur, amber eyes never leaving Claire's face. Margaret Walker looked up from her chair. For a brief second, she did not move. She was a small woman now, thinner than she had been years ago, wrapped in a faded wool cardigan that hung loosely over her narrow shoulders. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple knot, wisps escaping around her temples. Her face bore the fine lines of hardship rather than age. Skin pale and delicate, eyes still sharp despite the fatigue that illness had etched into her bones. When she breathed, there was that familiar wheeze Ethan knew too well, but her mind remained clear, observant. Her gaze locked onto the woman in her son's arms. Color drained from Margaret's face. "It's her," she whispered, the words barely audible over the crackle of the stove. Claire Harrington, the daughter of the man who had once stood in this very room years ago, his expensive coat brushing against the walls, his voice sharp with contempt as he told Margaret Walker that her son was not good enough, not educated enough, not wealthy enough, not worthy of his disabled daughter. Ethan felt his mother's hand tremble as she pushed herself to her feet. But whatever ghosts rose in Margaret's chest, they were swept aside the moment she saw Claire's lips, blue-tinged, parted with shallow breaths, and the violent shiver running through her frail body. "Put her down by the stove," Margaret said, her voice firm now, command slipping back into place. "Slowly. Don't let her warm too fast." Ethan obeyed instantly. He lowered Claire onto a thick blanket Margaret spread across the floor, careful to support her head and spine. Claire's eyes fluttered, unfocused, fear still gripping her even here, in warmth. "You're safe," Ethan said quietly. "You're inside. My mother's here." Claire tried to speak, but her jaw shook too hard. Margaret knelt beside her despite the protest in her knees. She pressed 2 fingers to Claire's wrist, checking her pulse, then touched her cheek with the back of her hand. "Hypothermia," she murmured. "Early, but serious." Rook lay down immediately at Claire's side, his large body flush against her legs, radiating heat. He rested his head near her hip, utterly still, as if he understood that this was not the moment for movement. Margaret looked at the dog, then at Ethan. "Good boy," she said softly, though whether she meant Rook or her son was unclear. She moved with practiced efficiency, pulling another blanket from the couch, then a kettle from the stove. Her hands shook slightly, betraying the strain, but her mind remained steady. "I need warm water," she said. "Not hot, and sugar. Ethan, gloves off. Rub her hands gently." As Ethan followed her instructions, memories pressed in on Margaret. Unwanted, sharp. The polished shoes of Thomas Harrington on her worn floorboards, the way he'd looked past her, as if poverty were contagious, the words he'd thrown like stones. But that man was gone, and this woman, this fragile, shaking woman on the floor, was not an enemy. She was someone's child, someone who had trusted the wrong person. Margaret swallowed and pushed the past aside. "Claire," she said gently, leaning close so her voice wouldn't frighten her, "you're going to hear some wheezing. That's just me. Don't worry about it." Claire's eyes focused slightly, recognition flickering through the haze. "Mrs. Walker," she whispered, I'm sorry." Margaret's jaw tightened. "We'll talk about apologies later," she said. "Right now, you breathe." The night stretched on in quiet urgency. Ethan stayed on the floor beside Claire, monitoring her breathing, adjusting blankets, speaking to her when her eyes drifted closed too long. His voice remained calm, steady, the same tone he'd used on wounded teammates who were terrified of falling asleep. Rook did not move Whooshit once. Outside, the storm thickened, snow piling against the windows, sealing the cabin off from the rest of the world. Inside, warmth slowly crept back into Claire's fingers, her shivering easing into something less violent. Margaret eventually sank into a chair, exhaustion pressing down on her chest. She watched Ethan work, pride and fear twisting together inside her. She had raised him to be strong because the world demanded it. She had never imagined that strength would one day be used to save the daughter of a man who had once humiliated her. Life, it seemed, had a strange sense of balance. Near dawn, Claire slept. Not unconscious, sleeping. Her breathing, even now, color returning faintly to her cheeks. Ethan finally allowed himself to exhale fully for the first time since the forest. Margaret reached for his hand, her fingers cold and light. "You did good," she said quietly. "Your father would have done the same." Ethan nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "She shouldn't have been out there," he said. "Someone did this to her." Margaret followed his gaze to the broken wheelchair folded against the wall, its twisted wheel catching the light. "Yes," she said, "and whoever it was thought the cold would finish the job." She looked at Claire again, sleeping by the fire, Rook guarding her like a silent sentinel. But they were wrong. As morning light began to creep through the frost-edged windows, Ethan understood that saving Claire's life was only the beginning. Whatever had happened in that forest would not stay buried under snow, and he would not walk away. Morning arrived quietly, pale winter light slipping through the frosted windows of the cabin. The storm had passed, leaving the forest hushed and deceptively peaceful, as if nothing cruel had happened beneath its branches the night before. Claire woke slowly. At first, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was wooden, rough-hewn, unfamiliar. The air smelled of pine smoke and something warm. Tea, maybe. Her body felt heavy, exhausted, but no longer frozen. When she tried to move, a sharp ache reminded her of everything at once: the forest, the snow, the broken wheelchair, the voice that had abandoned her. Her breath hitched. Ethan was there immediately. He sat in a chair near the bed, his broad frame slightly hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees as if he had never truly relaxed. In daylight, Claire could see him clearly for the first time since the night before. His face was more angular than she remembered from college, jaw squared by years of discipline and hardship. A short, well-kept beard shadowed his face, streaked faintly with gray that hadn't been there before. His eyes, steady, watchful, unmistakably kind, were the same. "You're awake," he said gently. "Don't rush. You're safe." Claire swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. "Your mother?" "In the kitchen," Ethan replied. "She hasn't stopped checking on you." As if summoned, Margaret Walker appeared in the doorway, moving carefully with a mug in both hands. In the daylight, her illness was more visible. The way she favored one side, the subtle tremor in her fingers, the shallow breaths she tried to hide behind quiet determination. She smiled anyway. "There she is," Margaret said softly. "Welcome back." Tears slipped down Claire's temples before she could stop them. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again, "for everything." Margaret set the mug down and sat beside her. "You can tell me later," she said, "when you're ready." Claire was ready now. The words came haltingly at first, then faster, as if once the truth began to surface, it refused to be pushed back down. She spoke of her father's sudden stroke a year earlier, the way grief had hollowed her out, how she'd barely noticed the legal documents Michael placed in front of her while she was drowning in loss. Michael Harrington, the man she had married because he was safe, polished, approved. The man who had learned to smile perfectly for cameras and condolences alike. "After the funeral," Claire said, her voice shaking, "he changed. Slowly. He took my phone, said it was easier if he handled things. He controlled my emails, my accounts. He said it was for my own good." Ethan listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Claire stared at her hands. "I found out about the transfers too late. He was moving money, assets, using my name." She closed her eyes. "Last night, he told me the truth, that he never loved me, that the forest would solve his problem." Margaret pressed her lips together, anger flashing through her tired eyes. "He broke my wheelchair," Claire continued. "He wanted me to freeze." Silence filled the room when she finished. Rook, lying near the fireplace, lifted his head and let out a low, unsettled sound as if he understood the weight of what had been said. Ethan stood. "This isn't an accident," he said quietly. "This is attempted murder." Claire nodded. "He'll tell them I wandered off, that I was confused. He's already done it before." As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed. A news alert. Local outlets were reporting a missing woman, Claire Harrington. A photo from better days filled the screen. Beneath it, a familiar face, Michael Harrington, stood before cameras, dark coat perfectly pressed, eyes red as if from sleepless nights. "Please," Michael said on the video, voice breaking at precisely the right moments. "If anyone has seen my wife, she's fragile. She's been struggling." Ethan shut the phone off. "He's building a story," he said, "and he's moving fast." Margaret straightened. "Then you need to move faster." Ethan met Claire's eyes. "I know someone. FBI, Financial Crimes, and Domestic Abuse Task Force. He owes me a favor." Claire hesitated. "I don't have proof, just my word." Ethan's expression hardened, not with anger, but resolve. "Then we get proof." That afternoon, after ensuring Claire was stable and Margaret rested, Ethan returned to the forest with Rook. They found what the snow hadn't fully erased: the broken wheel hidden beneath brush, footprints circling once, then leaving. Rook marked the scent, steady and sure. By evening, Ethan had everything he needed to start. Inside the cabin, Claire watched him prepare, methodical, calm, the way someone does when chaos has become familiar. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something other than fear. She felt believed. As night fell again over the quiet town, Michael Harrington continued his performance under bright lights, speaking of hope and prayer. He did not know yet that the truth had survived the cold, or that it had found a soldier who would not let it disappear. Night settled over the Harrington estate with practiced elegance. Snow lined the long private drive like a carpet laid out for no one, the mansion itself standing dark and quiet against the trees, all glass and stone and carefully curated wealth. It looked peaceful. That, Ethan knew, was exactly the point. He moved through the iron gate without a sound. Claire's voice echoed in his memory as he keyed in the access code she still remembered despite everything. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Rook stayed close at his heel, the German shepherd's black and tan coat blending into the shadows, his movements controlled and silent. At 9 years old, Rook was no longer reckless. His amber eyes scanned corners with the patience of a veteran. Inside, the house smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and expensive cologne. Everything was immaculate. Too immaculate for a home where grief was supposed to live. Ethan paused, listening. Nothing. He moved fast but carefully, muscle memory guiding him. Years of night operations had taught him how to read a space the way others read faces. The study was where Claire said Michael spent most of his time. That was where the safe would be. The door opened easily. The room was masculine in a cold, performative way. Dark wood shelves, leather chairs that looked rarely used, framed business awards lined with precise spacing. Michael Harrington's presence lingered in the details. Control, order, ownership. The safe was hidden behind a false panel near the desk. Ethan knelt, pulled out the compact biometric bypass device he carried for emergencies, and pressed it gently against the scanner. Claire's fingerprints, lifted earlier from her own wheelchair frame, did the rest. The safe opened. Inside were folders, flash drives, envelopes thick with legal documents. Ethan worked quickly, photographing pages, slotting drives into a secured reader, transfer records, power of attorney forms signed during the week of Claire's father's death, emails printed out and annotated in Michael's neat handwriting. Rook let out a barely audible huff. Headlights swept across the windows. Ethan froze. Rook's ears lifted. Once. Then stillness. Michael was home. Ethan closed the safe silently and slipped behind the bookshelf as the front door opened. Michael's voice drifted through the house, low, smooth, rehearsed. "I told them I'd call back," he said into his phone. Yes, of course I'm worried." Michael Harrington stepped into the study moments later. In person, he was exactly as Claire had described. Tall, well-groomed, salt and pepper hair, styled deliberately, jaw clean-shaven and sharp. He moved with confidence born of entitlement, not strength. A man used to rooms bending to him. Ethan watched through a narrow gap as Michael poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and sat at the desk. He opened his laptop. "Soon," Michael muttered. "Just need one more signature cleared." Rook did not move. Ethan shifted his weight as quietly as breath, sliding toward the adjacent utility corridor. A narrow space, unfinished walls, the hum of electrical panels masking sound. He pressed himself into the darkness as Michael stood abruptly. "Damn it," Michael snapped. Footsteps approached. Ethan slowed his breathing, every muscle locked. Michael entered the corridor, checking a breaker panel. For one long moment, he stood less than 6 feet away. Ethan could smell the alcohol on his breath. Then Michael turned back. The door closed. Only when the house settled again did Ethan move. Minutes later, he was gone, slipping back into the snow with Rook at his side, the evidence secured and encrypted. The cabin felt warmer than it had any right to. Claire sat near the stove, wrapped in a blanket, her posture tense but steady. Margaret slept in the next room, exhaustion finally claiming her. When Ethan entered, Claire looked up instantly. "You're back." He nodded. "I got it." He laid out the evidence methodically. Claire's face drained as she saw the numbers, the dates, the plans. There were even draft emails, unsent, discussing contingencies and environmental exposure. "He was planning it," she whispered. "For months." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "And we can prove it." He sent the encrypted files immediately. Agent Daniel Moore responded within minutes. Daniel Moore was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, hair cropped short and already graying, face weathered by years in federal service. He and Ethan had served together overseas before Moore transitioned to the FBI's Financial Crimes and Domestic Abuse Unit. His messages were brief, direct. This is enough to open multiple cases. Attempted homicide, financial exploitation, fraud. Stay where you are. I'm looping in local PD now. Claire exhaled shakily. "He'll try to spin it." "He already has," Ethan replied. "But not for long." Outside, Rook lay by the door, alert but calm, as if he knew the hunt was no longer in the forest but in the daylight ahead. In town, Michael Harrington was still speaking into cameras, still perfecting his performance. He did not know yet that the story had slipped from his control, or that the soldier he never took seriously had just dismantled everything he built on lies. The arrest came at dawn. Snow still clung to the hedges outside the Harrington estate when the unmarked vehicles rolled in, tires crunching softly over ice. Michael Harrington opened his front door wearing the same calm, practiced expression he used for cameras, until the words were spoken, slow and unmistakable. He was tall in the doorway, shoulders squared, hair perfectly combed, but his hands trembled when the cuffs closed. The performance ended there. Across town, in a smaller house with peeling paint and a narrow porch, Claire watched the news footage from a chair pulled close to the window. Her blanket was folded neatly over her lap. The morning light touched her face, and for the first time since the forest there was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet steadiness. Agent Daniel Moore stood nearby, phone pressed to his ear, nodding as updates came in. In person, he was even more imposing than he appeared on screen, broad-shouldered, compact, with a face shaped by long hours and hard decisions. His gray-streaked hair was cut short, his voice low and economical. When he finished the call, he met Claire's gaze. "They have him," he said, "and her." The woman, Michael's accomplice, had been taken from a downtown office not an hour earlier. She was younger than Michael, sharp-featured, stylish, with a cool confidence that dissolved under questioning. Emails, transfers, timelines, everything aligned. The plan had been methodical. The forest was not an impulse. It was a calculation. Claire closed her eyes and let the words settle. Ethan stood behind her, hands resting lightly on the chair handles, close enough to be felt but never imposed. He had shaved that morning, the familiar angles of his face clean and severe, eyes calm but alert. Years of service had taught him to wait for outcomes without flinching. This one mattered differently. Michael was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and abuse of a disabled spouse. The accomplice faced her own list of charges: aiding, falsification, obstruction. The judge denied bail. The story turned fast. By afternoon, the headlines had changed. The grieving husband had become a suspect. The narrative collapsed under documents and timestamps. When reporters asked Claire for comment, she declined. Her attorney, a tall, composed woman named Sarah Collins with copper-brown hair cut to her shoulders and a voice like tempered steel, speaking for her instead. Sarah had the calm authority of someone who knew how to protect without provoking. She did not embellish. She let facts do their work. The divorce was swift. Michael contested at first, then withdrew when the evidence continued to surface. Claire regained control of her accounts, her home, her name. The estate that once felt like a cage became an asset to sell, not a memory to endure. She moved with intention now, choices grounded in clarity rather than obligation. Margaret Walker watched these changes from her chair. The stove, her health improving with proper treatment and careful rest. She spoke little of the past. When she did, it was only to say that life had a way of returning what was taken, sometimes with interest. Winter loosened its grip. Snow receded from the paths. The forest opened again. Claire began physical therapy 3 mornings a week in town, her progress steady and hard-won. Ethan drove her when he could. When he couldn't, he waited. He had learned that showing up did not always require action. They did not rush what followed. When they married, it was quiet, no spectacle. A small gathering at the edge of the woods, where sunlight filtered through branches like a benediction. Claire wore something simple. Ethan wore a suit that fit like discipline and ease had finally made peace. Margaret sat in the front row, eyes bright. Rook lay at Ethan's feet, older now, his muzzle beginning to gray, steady as ever. Their life together did not circle the past. It moved forward. The community center opened in late spring. They chose an old brick building near the town square and rebuilt it piece by piece. Wide doors, accessible rooms, warm light. The sign out front read Northwood Community House. Inside, there were classes for caregivers, legal clinics for those who needed help navigating systems that often failed them, and a quiet room for rest. Rook's photograph hung near the entrance. Children pointed to it. Elderly visitors smiled. He had become a symbol without trying, of patience, loyalty, and the power of staying when it would be easier to leave. Ethan never took a role in managing Claire's company interests. He did something harder and truer. He stood behind her. He cooked when she worked late. He listened. He kept the forest paths clear in winter. He learned that strength could be still. On the first anniversary of the center's opening, Claire wheeled herself to the window and watched the afternoon drift by. People moved in and out of the building with easy familiarity. She felt something settle inside her, a sense not of victory, but of balance. Michael Harrington would be sentenced that summer. Justice, she had learned, was not loud. It arrived with patience and proof. It stayed. And in the quiet that followed, a new beginning took root, grown not from revenge, but from truth, care, and the simple courage to endure. There are moments in life when everything seems lost, when the cold feels too deep, the night too long, and hope too fragile to hold. Yet again and again, we are reminded that no darkness is ever truly empty. Even in the quietest places, God is already at work. In this story, what was meant to be an ending became a beginning. Not because the world suddenly became fair, but because grace stepped in through courage, loyalty, and a love that refused to look away. A man followed his conscience. A dog followed his training and his heart. And somewhere between fear and faith, a life was saved. God's miracles rarely announce themselves. They often appear disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary good, choosing kindness over comfort, truth over silence, and compassion over fear. Perhaps the real miracle is not that help arrived, but that someone answered the call. Every day, people around us are fighting battles we cannot see. A neighbor, a stranger, maybe even you. And sometimes God's answer to those prayers is not a miracle from heaven, but a person willing to act. If this story moved you, share it. Let it travel further than we can. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories that carry faith, healing, and hope, please subscribe to the channel and walk this path with us. May God watch over you and your loved ones.